Hello, and welcome to Leadership, Faith, and Recovery in the New Year. I'm Claire Carlin, Vice President of Partnerships and Alliances at Destination DC and Executive Director of our affiliated American Experience Foundation. Thank you for joining us today. I'm standing in the Washington National Cathedral, and I'm grateful to be able to safely experience this space today. Our conversation will reflect on the year past and look to the year ahead. We want to thank you all, our members, partners, clients, and colleagues for your creativity and resilience this year. And what better space to reflect upon the year to come than the Washington National Cathedral? Before we get into that conversation, I have a few Destination DC member updates to share. First, we have a brand new website. Members, you may have noticed a refreshed look on washington.org. I encourage you to explore the site and work with your account manager to ensure that your business is represented the way that you would like it to be. In addition to today's conversation, we continue to host online events for members and partners. Tomorrow, Wednesday, January 27th at 5 p.m., please join us for our monthly member trivia. This is hosted by Andrew Rawls of Fiat Lux Tours at 5 p.m. And this month's theme is inauguration. Our partners are DC Tricycle Tours, DC Military Tours, and White House Gifts. If you've joined us before, you know that there are great prizes for the winner, and it's a lot of fun. Looking to next month, Destination DC has your Valentine's experience covered. For the entire month of February, partners will be offering specials to support students and the American Experience Foundation. You can create your Valentine's dinner with dinner from Tony and Joe's, Nick's Riverside Grill, or the Ivy City Smokehouse. You can complement that dinner with beer and seltzer from DC Brow and dessert from Cake Witchcraft. You can enjoy a safe Valentine date experience at Arctic House or the Capitol Wheel, which is the Ferris wheel down at National Harbor. All of these businesses will make contributions to the American Experience Foundation with your purchase, and the team at the Capitol Wheel will also match individual donations to the American Experience Foundation. So thanks all of those businesses for their partnership, and I encourage you to explore their offerings. For a date night at home, on Thursday, February 11th at 7:30 p.m., join us for my virtually funny Valentine. Robert Mack, Destination DC member and funny man, and his team of comedians will host a virtual comedy show. Proceeds from this event will benefit the American Experience Foundation. Tickets are just $3.40. That represents the 340 student engagements that the American Experience Foundation offered in 2020. Many of those were done with contributions from you, our members and partners, and thank you for your support. Full details of all of these programs can be found on washington.org/member events, and shortly, members, you'll receive an email invitation from us with details. Now let's turn our attention here to the Washington National Cathedral. I wish you all could be with us this morning. I know that experiencing things in real life is as important to you as it is to me. That's why we all work in travel and tourism and hospitality. The last time that I was in this space was on Election Day. It was the first day that the cathedral opened the doors to the public since March, and they opened it so people could come experience the space for reflection. I sat in this vast space with a handful of other visitors in chairs spread apart with our masks on as we reflected on the importance of the day. When I walked out, I met the Very Reverend Randy Hollerith, Dean of the Washington National Cathedral. Randy and his team were out in front welcoming visitors. Dean Hollerith joins us today with Destination DC's President and CEO, Elliott Ferguson. I thank Dean Hollerith and the Washington National Cathedral team for hosting us, and now I turn the conversation to Randy and Elliott to discuss leadership, faith, and recovery in the new year. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire, and good morning to our audience. It's so nice to be in front of you, even though we are all waiting for that day that we'll be able to do this in person. And you know, it's such a magnificent place that we're in today in the National Cathedral, the Washington National Cathedral, and this amazing opportunity for us to have a conversation with Dean Hollerith. I want to start off by saying we are, in fact, practicing social distancing, as we're at least 6 feet apart in this magnificent venue, but we are going to take off our masks so it doesn't sound as if we're talking through a muzzle and you can hear us a little more eloquently. So, Dean Hollerith, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for hosting us this morning. And for those of you who don't know, we have the pleasure of having the Dean of the Washington National Cathedral as a local guy, or homeboy as we like to call folks that are from the area. One of the first things that I want to know in regards to you being in this position is that I'm calling you Dean Hollerith. Claire referenced you as the Right Reverend. And there are so many different titles that are out there, Reverend and what have you. So for the audience's sake, can you give us an explanation as to the differences, and before I start calling you Randy, as to why the different names and titles?
I'd be happy to, Elliott. And when we say welcome, we're so glad to have you all here today, and welcome to all those who are joining us. It's always a joy to have people here in the cathedral, whether virtually or otherwise. So thank you for being with us. So, arcane church nomenclature. You want to talk about that for a minute? So there are a number of titles. So Reverend, of course, means pastor, minister, or in our case, priest. The Very Reverend is what I am, which is a dean. So a dean is a priest in charge of a cathedral or in charge of a region, an area of a diocese. So, and academia has picked that term up from the church and uses it for colleges and universities. The Right Reverend is a bishop of an area in the church, and the Most Reverend is the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, or in other places might be a cardinal or an archbishop, something like that.
Excellent, excellent. So it's almost like general, Major General, Brigadier General, and then General, the 4 stars. So thanks for sharing that. There'll be a quiz afterwards for those that are listening.
Right,
so,
exactly.
So, you know, as we look at the presence of the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., which we're so excited to have this in our city, we focus on inauguration. We focus on activities that are usually tied to the inauguration, and the fact that 20 days ago we were in a different destination, not necessarily with the Washington National Cathedral, but as we look at Washington as a city, dealing with the insurrection and focusing on, quite frankly, recovering after the shock and horror of what was happening in a Capitol building. Traditionally, as we look at all of the pomp and circumstance tied to inauguration, there are activities and festivities that actually happen here during that time frame that did not happen this year. I love your perspective as to how you envision, or how you saw things on January 6th, and then, of course, looking at the actual inauguration last week. What was your perception of what did happen versus what should have happened during that time frame?
It's a great question. It's a big question. We did have, traditionally, the day after the inauguration, the inaugural prayer service happens here at the cathedral. And it's something that we look forward to every 4 years, that celebrates the transition of power in our nation and celebrates our democracy and prays for our country. And this year it did happen, it just happened virtually. So the president and vice president and families watched from the White House, and we did some broadcasting live from this space, but a lot of it was pre-recorded. So we were glad to keep the tradition going, although we really missed having everybody together. You know, when you've got 3,000 people filling this space for that event, it's really quite wonderful. It's been difficult days that we've been going through, but between the pandemic and the social unrest and what happened on January 6th and our struggles in our nation, it has been a very, very difficult time. And we see our role here at the cathedral is helping to offer some peace and some hope, and to ask people to, to raise people to what Lincoln called the better angels of their nature, so to speak, And we've been trying to focus on that. Hence, that was one of the reasons we opened the cathedral doors on election day, because we knew that that was such a fraught time for so many people. And although we could only have 100 people at a time, we kept it open all day long and kept people moving in and out to have a chance to come in and just pray and reflect and be in this sacred space during that day.
You know, and I think that how you have handled it in your leadership during such tumultuous times that really have been going on for a long time, but really bubbled up during the summer with the entire Black Lives Matter movement and some of the unfortunate circumstances tied to that movement that we all witnessed on television. You teamed up with some of your peers to really take a leadership role and offer a sense of peace. And I'd love to hear more about, as you reflected on what was going on, how you came to a point where you came together and it received global attention and really focused on some of the things in which we should be dealing with as we move forward during these times.
The protests that were sparked this summer, they were powerful, and they were, from my point of view, necessary in our nation today. We really saw them as not only something that was difficult to deal with and painful for many, but also as an opportunity to invite our nation to do the hard work that we need to do. Too many white folks tend to think that racism is a thing of the past, or has been primarily a thing of the past, or that we've put it away, or that we've dealt with it. And in fact, we haven't. There's a lot of it that still needs to be tackled. And in order to really honor all of our brothers and sisters in our country, we need to tackle that issue. And so we saw it as an opportunity to really invite people to look at white privilege and systemic racism and the pain that that continues to cause in our nation. And because we really do believe in healing and moving forward and trying to rid our country of that great pandemic, you know, that pandemic of racism that has existed since our very founding.
Yeah. What type of feedback have you received and continue to receive as you go about with that messaging?
Well, there's feedback on many fronts. There's a lot of gratitude that we're having these conversations and raising these issues. There's a lot of questioning and exploration as people are confronting how they participate in one way or another in the racism that exists in our nation, either consciously or unconsciously. I think so many of us do it unconsciously. And so there have been a lot of comments and discussions about that, a lot of talk about how can I own my piece of it and what can I do to make things better, because it really is, we can't root it out till each of us is willing to confront it in ourselves.
You're absolutely right, and I think that, you know, as we've all had to deal with what happened last year with Black Lives Matter, one, the reality is that this is not something that's new in terms of these senseless murders that happened, be it by the hands of law enforcement and or just the history of America. And I think that as I tackle this subject, I chair the U.S. Travel Association. We have over 1,000 members, and there are not a lot of people that look like me that are black that are leading destination management organizations such as Destination DC. So, you know, my biggest concern is the ebb and flow of emotions tied to times like this, whereas people are outraged and concerned on Monday, but by Thursday or Friday, they've kind of gotten back to business, gone back to their daily lives. And my mission is to make sure that this message continues and folks are really educating themselves, no matter what their race or ethnicity, and understanding the dynamics of all the communities that we have in America and in a city like Washington, D.C. And I think that from a spiritual or religious perspective, there's a great opportunity to also continue that conversation above and beyond what we've seen right now.
Oh, you're absolutely right. One of the things we cannot do is to think that we can let it go or put it down. The conversations have to continue. We have to love our fellow citizens, to love our neighbors means to keep the topic up front, so that we're continuing to deal with it. Not in a way that produces struggle or fight or guilt or anything, but because it takes a lot of conversation, it takes a lot of listening, it takes a lot of self-reflection in order to move forward on these really difficult issues. And one of the things that's important to us in the cathedral is that on any given Sunday morning, we want to make sure that people who are either here in live, which hasn't happened since May, or tuning in digitally, that they will see up here on this platform, where the altar is usually right here, that they will look and they'll see people that looks like them. So that we keep our own clergy, our own ministry as balanced between male and female, black and white, people of color as possible, because that sends an important message as well. And during the demonstrations this summer, we were really proud to be able to host a couple of demonstrations that came down Wisconsin Avenue and ended here at the cathedral. And I was really proud to see the peaceful work being done by, there were mainly students who were gathered, and it was really wonderful for us to be able to welcome them and listen to them and offer our hospitality.
No, I think that's great. I applaud you for your efforts, and equally as much I applaud you for making sure that this conversation continues. I think the most important thing and the most gratifying thing for me is when people reach out to me and say, okay, I did not realize that you all were actually talking about me in this particular instance. I'm learning a lot more, I'm more open-minded. And I think that from my upbringing, the church is a great opportunity, a great place to explore, to engage, and to a certain extent, move forward in terms of your thinking. And I applaud you and all of your peers in your efforts to make sure that that happens and giving people an opportunity to do that.
Well, thank you. It's really quite simple from my point of view, is that Jesus' command to love demands it of us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So moving on, we're in the Washington National Cathedral, whereas, I always joke that folks in our own backyard make the worst tourists. And folks like myself, I moved here 19 years ago. I've been here several times, and I appreciate the majesty of this space. I remember coming with my church in the late 80s, maybe early 90s, for the very first time visiting Washington, D.C. and exploring this space. But some of the things that are important to our industry is the fact that when we are working to bring groups to Washington, D.C., they're looking for unique spaces. And traditionally, you don't think of a church or a place like the Washington National Cathedral as one of those places. It's not in your wheelhouse. But fortunately for us, you all allowed us to host IPW, which is a show very important to us through the U.S. Travel Association, whereas we're given an opportunity to bring the global community, those that influence travel, to Washington, D.C., in some cases for the very first time. And we hosted a magnificent dinner here in 2017. And I know that there are perspectives in terms of spiritual place versus other, and I'd love for you to kind of expound to the audience as to how you all promote and or allow different types of events and activities to happen here at the Washington National Cathedral.
And Elliott, thank you for raising that, because I do think it's something that many people don't realize, that when you think about a church community, you would never think about hosting non-religious events in the aisles of your church. Churches are spaces that are designed for worship. Right. Historically, though, the great cathedrals of the world have been central places of worship, but they have also been gathering places for the community. So if you look at the rood screen here that separates the high altar area from the nave of the cathedral, that area up there is always for worship. That's sacred space. It's all sacred space, but that's sacred space just for worship. Major worship happens here in the nave of the cathedral, but also this is a space that we make available to the community for all kinds of things, everything from galas to dinners to film festivals to you name it have taken place in this nave. And it's one of the largest event venues in the city. We can host a dinner for 850 people or a reception for 1,500. And we love being able to do that because it's a beautiful place to have an event. We can create an atmosphere, as the people are seeing on the screen now, that's really unique. But we also at the same time are fulfilling our deeper mission in that because we're inviting people to come into this sacred space, which is a house of prayer for all people, regardless of what your faith tradition is or none thereof. We want people to enjoy and appreciate this place.
Well, let me tell you, the event that we hosted here, every city that hosts the IPW show, they're looking for the most unique space to host this prestigious dinner. I will never forget the look on the mayor's face as she walked in. And as you said, the audience had a chance to see some of the pictures and looked around, and the pride she had and the pride that we had. And equally as much, the global community, those that were here from all over the world that said, in all of our years of doing or attending this show or doing special events, we've never experienced anything like what we were able to do in 2017. And it started outside, and I do want to ask you some questions about the outdoor space here as well, because our event started with a reception outside, and it was nice. It was a little warm because it's in the summertime, but when those doors opened and there were like 25 harpists on each side playing, and it was, you know, there's the sense of spiritual versus religion. In this particular case, it was a spiritual space that was significantly well received by those that were here. So when you look at the events that you've done inside the Washington National Cathedral, give us a sense of some of the things that folks can actually do on the grounds of the National Cathedral as well.
Oh, that's a great question. And you know, whether you're a person of faith or religious or not, you know, there are values involved. And the value that's so important to us is hospitality, welcoming the stranger. Whether it's for worship or a tour or for an $850 person dinner, we want to make people feel welcome in our space. So this cathedral sits on 58 acres here at the top, at the highest point in Washington, D.C. And we share the space with our three schools, St. Albans School and National Cathedral School and Beauvoir. And it's a beautiful green space. And what has been so gratifying to me is that during this pandemic, when the cathedral has been closed, the doors have been closed, this space, the green space, has become incredibly important to the community. We've seen tripling of people up here on a daily basis, especially when the weather's nice, enjoying the Bishop's Garden. And we have multiple outdoor spaces that are available for venues here at the cathedral, including the West Front, which is where you all were. We have a beautiful amphitheater as well that can host several hundred folks. And then just in general, we love to keep this space just as wide open as we can for just people strolling the grounds and taking part up here.
That's excellent. Now, we always think positively, but I'm sure the audience, especially those in our industry, they're wondering, what can you not do in terms of events? Or what is there these are the things that unfortunately you may not be able to do. Can you actually bring alcohol into an event?
Yes, there is no, alcohol is served here during events. That is not an issue for us whatsoever. We serve it every Sunday, during communion, so we understand that. We don't have a list of things that we can't do. We do not hold partisan political events in the cathedral. That's really important to us. As we say, we're a house of prayer for all people, and we want to respect that and continue that. But outside of that, we take it on a case-by-case basis and look at, there are very few things we've really found that we felt were totally inappropriate for the space. There are some. I mean, there would never be a boxing match here in the cathedral, so to speak, right?
That's refreshing
but,
to hear.
The hard and fast rule is no political partisan events.
That's also refreshing to all of those that are in the space of planning events here in Washington, D.C., because there's always a list of things you cannot do. It's good to know that you all are very open-minded. We hosted a retreat for our team on the grounds about 5 or 6 years ago. Can you give folks some insight as to some of the meeting space that you might have, that if someone wants to do a retreat or something, is that something that folks can actually do?
Yes, up on the 7th floor on the west end of the cathedral is our beautiful observation gallery, which can host a good-sized group of people for a retreat. And off of that is a large room with sort of theater seating where people can also meet for lectures or larger conversations. And it gives you some of the best views of the city. I mean, when you're up there on the 7th floor, you're higher than the Washington Monument essentially, or as high as the Washington Monument. And so looking down the hill over the city is quite beautiful. And if you come for an event, whether it's a gala or a dinner or a retreat upstairs, we offer specialty tours, behind the scenes tours, give you a chance to, if you're interested, to climb up into the great central tower and visit the bell chambers, which is really fun. It's kind of getting to see the Harry Potterness of the building, as I like to say, you know, behind the scenes. And so we offer all of those things in conjunction with other events that folks may be interested in holding here at the cathedral.
That's really nice to know. I will admit to the crowd that, to those that are listening, that we never pick favorites for anything. We love all of our members. However, I'm asked on a regular basis, hey, I'm looking for a place to propose to my significant other. What can you suggest? And I'm kind of curious, what space do you all, how do you all handle those requests here at the Washington National Cathedral?
Well, from a sort of an official basis, anyone can get married here at the cathedral. Of course, we have weddings for our community, for folks who worship here on a regular basis. But folks come from around the city who would like to have a wedding here at the cathedral, and we host grand weddings at times in the nave, and we can even host wedding receptions in the nave following the wedding. And during COVID, we're trying to offer people opportunities for much smaller weddings, you know, with say 50 people or 40 people gathered together in safety, because we can do that because we have a large space to do it. So we try to host as many weddings as the schedule will allow. We love to do it. My staff have on many occasions just spontaneously run into a couple that's getting ready to get engaged and taken them up to the tower to see the views of the city and let them get engaged in that space overlooking the city. You know, when I walk the grounds on a daily basis, I'll see lots of families who are celebrating a quinceañera, so to speak, say, and they're on the grounds taking photos and celebrating with their daughter. And those are unofficial things going on here, but it's sort of part of the community feel.
And so you actually have a department, whereas if someone wants to, in addition to actually having an event here, if I call you on Wednesday and say, hey, I want to propose to my significant other on Friday, there's someone here that can handle all those give them some insight as to how to make it happen.
Absolutely, and we have a whole department that handles all of our wedding arrangements and various. There are hundreds of options for how to do a wedding here at the cathedral, and we're happy to have that conversation with anyone.
That's excellent. I will tell you, the couple of people that I recommended come here, they basically said that their significant other was almost distracted by looking around at the majesty of the space and of course the views of the city, and I almost couldn't propose because she was so in awe of the space. So that's really refreshing to know.
Well, if you get married in the nave, you got to realize it's 176 yards from one end of this cathedral to the other. So that is a long walk.
It's a long walk, but it's a beautiful walk, I will say that for sure. So, you know, last year, probably around this time, the U.S. was grappling with the pandemic. Maybe not as intensively as what was happening in China, but it was coming. And we heard about it and we were concerned. And then all of a sudden, things in which we did on a regular basis all came to a screeching halt. Tell me from your perspective, what were the conversations that you all were having in terms of being able to fulfill the mission of the Washington National Cathedral in an environment that was literally shutting down and rather quickly?
It was as for all of us, it was a very stressful time. With the cathedral doors being closed, we lost quite a bit of revenue. And so unfortunately, in the summer, we had to say goodbye to about 15% of our staff, which was incredibly painful. But it was necessary to do at the time. But what I'm so proud of is how the staff from the very beginning said, okay, how can we continue to do what we do best with these doors closed? You know, how does, when we're so focused on this building all the time, we know that being the cathedral is more than the building. And so we were blessed about 9 months before the pandemic of having completely redone our video systems here in the cathedral with 12 cameras in the building. And so we immediately just switched all of that to creating online content, as you're doing, of course,
right.
But for every Sunday and every day of the week, and offering services and programs during the week, and being able to use the wonderful system that we've created. And it's been incredibly successful. We've seen our folks who are tuning into the cathedral grow dramatically around the country and indeed around the world. I have folks who get up on Monday morning in New Zealand to join us for Sunday worship, you know. So we've pivoted quickly, and it was not easy, but we're very proud of what we've been able to do. And the reality of being the National Cathedral is almost bigger now with the doors closed than it was when the doors were open, when we can average 6,000 to 8,000 to 9,000 people on a Sunday morning. And if we had the doors open and every seat was filled, it's about 3,200.
Right.
So,
you know, and also, you know, you're the dean, you're the leader of the Washington National Cathedral. What lessons have you learned looking back on Randy circa March 2020 versus now as we're moving forward? What lessons have you learned in terms of all the things you've had to deal with? I mean, it's very painful to let go of people. I would imagine in a case like yours, it's probably even more heartbreaking if that's even the case. But what things have you learned, and how has it shaped who you are now as a leader, spiritually and otherwise?
well, I'm a pastor at heart, a lover of souls. That's what matters most to me. So as you can imagine, as a CEO of sorts, the dean of the cathedral, having to say goodbye to some wonderful people who, through no fault of their own, were losing their jobs because of this pandemic, was incredibly difficult. And some of the greatest lessons that I've learned is, one, you have to give people space to grieve.
Right.
You have to be upfront and deal with the loss, whether it's loss of life from the virus or loss of colleagues from the results of the virus. But at the same time, you have to focus on what's possible,
right,
and not what you've lost. You got to give space to what you've lost, but then you got to focus on what's possible. As we say in the church here, you got to look for the grace.
right.
You know, where's the grace? And the grace for us, one of the graces for us, was this incredible system that we could build off of. And that grace has been fantastic. It's helped us raise morale and keep focused and do some really creative things.
Yeah, we've heard, to your point, you made reference to the fact that we've had to go and use virtual tours of Washington as an opportunity to keep people excited about coming to our destination. As much as the Washington community tends to think that everybody wants to come to Washington, we've got all these great things. Some of the things in which we sell monuments, memorials, museums, Washington National Cathedral, when we're out saying, I just envision the family of four saying, hey, do you want to go to Washington, D.C. to go to the monuments, memorials, museums, and the cathedral, or do you want to go to Orlando for Disney World? We're probably not going to always win that until people physically come here. And I think to the point you made, we've had an opportunity to expound upon people's perceptions of Washington as, with the exception of what happened on January 6th, which we're now dealing with from a global perspective as we sell our destination. People now see how green Washington is, how welcoming the Washington National Cathedral is, because to a certain extent people think, well, that's off limits. I have to go in there only for religious reasons and that's it. So, that's been great for us, and I would imagine the same thing for you and your team.
Oh, it's been huge for us. And this city is, and I mean, I'm born and raised here in this city, and I got to say, it never gets old.
Right.
It's incredibly beautiful. And you're right, I think many people don't realize how much green space is in this city, huge amounts of green space in this city. And we love being a place of welcome. It doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what your interests are, religious or otherwise. We just like opening our doors and saying, come on in.
Right.
And we're grateful for people's support to help us keep this place going. But the more we can welcome people in, the happier I am. As I always say, when you come into this cathedral as a visitor, we want you to leave as a friend.
Fair enough. And I think that's what people are now seeing with the virtual tours and opportunities that you all are putting in front of them. So we talked about or we reference spiritual versus religious. And we see, and this is a spiritual places, spiritual and religious. Can you expound upon that for those that might be scratching their head and asking what's the difference?
Well, I mean, this is a Christian cathedral, of course. It is part of the Episcopal Church. But since its founding, it's been important that it be a house of prayer for all people. So many of the national services that we do here at the cathedral are interfaith services, intended to bring together the faith traditions of our nation. We like to say that that as Christians, we have a lot of truth to offer about God, but we don't have a corner on God's market. And we'd also like to offer events here in the cathedral that invite people who do not have a religious affiliation, but who have an interest in spirituality, in the transcendent, to come in for various events where they can feel free to experience this place in the way that works for them. So whether it's 1,500 people having yoga in the nave, which I think they're seeing right now on the screen, or when we offer Seeing Deeper, which is when we turn this incredible light show in the cathedral and invite people to come in. When we did this the first time, or one of the first times, we put on this amazing lights exhibit in the cathedral, invited the community to come into the building. And I thought we'd get 400 or 500 people on a February night who would be interested in seeing the cathedral lit up from the inside. And that night we had over 5,000 people who came through the door. So it, and they just sat on the floor. There was no agenda. They just sat on the floor. They walked around. Some people had picnics. They visited with their friends, and they just enjoyed the space in ways that was meaningful to them.
That's excellent, excellent. And I think that when you think of what you just referenced, and I think about 2021 and all the things in which you have to deal with, be it a religious or spiritual issue that people may have, or however they might feel, we can't you can't help but think about faith and healing, and especially now. So what does that look like? Every year in corporate America, there's always the strategic plan. I don't think there's a perspective that you have a strategic plan in terms of dealing with things, and I'm sure you do. So can you share with the audience what does faith and healing and the message look like as you are now into 2021 and already dealing with some obstacles as a nation, and we're still dealing with the pandemic?
Yeah, some of the focus for us in the coming fiscal year, is going to be on healing the soul of the nation. That's sort of the one of the taglines, one of the focuses that we're going to have, which works in beautifully with our larger strategic plan. But we really believe that it's important that we continue to be truth tellers, that we allow spaces, and we want this to be a space in our nation where people can come together from across ideological divides to have open and honest conversations, that we see ourselves as a convener. This cathedral exists at sort of the intersection of the sacred and the civic, here in Washington, D.C. And so we understand ourselves as one of our important roles is as a convener of important conversations. And whether those are around race or those are around important issues around our nation, we like to be able to offer those, and we will be offering them moving forward, trying to build a deeper understanding and healing in our country. We have lost the ability in many ways to listen to each other.
Right.
And we need to recover that. And so any little ways that we can help to do that, that's what we're going to be about.
That's refreshing. I'm not surprised that you said it, but it is extremely refreshing to hear it. And I think one division that comes to mind right now, which, church and politics, but, there's still there's a concern or a lot of anxiety in regards to Republican versus Democrat. Trump Republican versus regular Republican versus the Democratic perspective, and versus we're all Americans, we live in the same country, we all need to move forward in a positive direction and understand our differences and respect when we don't agree, but we have to move forward together as a nation. What's the messaging that you're offering as it pertains to folks that are looking at someone that's not in their party and having a negative perception of that individual simply because of that?
One of the things that I like to talk about is Dr. King's talk about love looks like understanding goodwill. You know, creating understanding goodwill. I think it's one of the focus we have is to help people, to invite people to begin to not to look at party identification, because we tend to paint one another with our ideologies.
Right.
But what are our stories? Because our stories are always bigger than our ideologies.
Right.
And how can we share our stories with one another? Because it's in sharing our stories that we learn to appreciate and know what it means to stand in one another's shoes. And whether you're on the left politically or on the right politically, there are some powerful stories that ought to be heard, so that we can honor one another's humanity and dignity, even as we disagree in this nation. I'm not interested in any sort of fake unity in this country where we overlook the issues that we have, but rather that we see that every person, I would say, that every human being is a beloved child of God, and being able to honor that even as we disagree. So that's the work that we're engaged in.
It's a very good word. I'm hoping that more and more of us will get that messaging as we move on with the new administration, and hopefully the temperature and the gauge that people have right now in terms of politics will change, and we'll go back to the things.
It's taken us a long time to get to this place.
Yeah.
It's going to take us quite a while to come out of this place.
True. And arguably it was somewhat inevitable. I mean, I think that I've heard that several times, that at some point we have to get to a point where it seems so, hopeless, that now we have to, just similar to the pandemic, we now have to pause and say, okay, we have to move forward in a positive way out of necessity. It's the right thing to do. It's the Christian thing to do. So,
social media is still essentially in its infancy.
Right.
We're still trying to figure out how to cope with social media, and with the way that it has put us into our own echo chambers. That has been very unhealthy for our nation. Right. But it's going to take us a while to figure out how to continue the good things about social media, and at the same time draw us out into a common space once again.
Absolutely, absolutely. When I think about our industry, which is travel tourism, and we were referencing the political differences, but we talked about the Black Lives Matter movement last summer and continuous issues. There's an international issue as well in terms of understanding the differences that the global community offers. Whereas in Washington, D.C., you can see a male that looks like me that might not be African American. He could be from Chad. We can be from another country, and so therefore not everyone looks like, or maybe we have similarities, but there's so many differences. One thing I love about travel, especially international travel, is that it gives us a chance to explore our differences and celebrate our likenesses in ways that, quite frankly, staying at home and staying in your own little enclave of your world does not offer you that opportunity. When you think about religious or Christian aspects of that unity, are there things that come to mind that are parallel to how we look at our industry and how we bring people together that offer different perspectives? And we give people an opportunity to ask us questions, if I'm in China, about being black in America, and because their perception is what they see in movies. And sometimes it's not necessarily the most glamorous way in which people are portrayed. How do you handle or tackle some of the same issues from the leadership role that you've had, not only here, but throughout your entire career in ministry?
From a theological point of view, talking a little sort of shop as far as our faith goes, I like to say that we meet Christ most profoundly in meeting one another. And what I translate that into is that how we grow as human beings is by our encounters, our honest encounters with each other. Right. Especially people who are culturally different, come from other places, who have very different experiences from us. And so it's a great pleasure for us on any given Sunday, normally in normal times, that we welcome people from around the world into this building. and I get a chance to, they will often stand and want to meet with me and welcome them, and I'll often have prayers with them privately, that sort of thing. And so the more we can travel, the more we can open ourselves to one another, the more we can become vulnerable and learn from one another. I think the richer our lives become and the closer our world becomes. I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
No,
but
you are. No, I agree with you, and it gives us a chance to remind Americans that, with the exception of Native Americans, we're all immigrants.
Yes.
And we all came with differences, and some of those differences are still celebrated in certain communities. I love, people of Italian descent that have never been to Italy, but they still hold on to that Italian heritage, and they appreciate it. I've been to Italy more than most of them have, and that's a part of the American experience. And I think that's also, again, with tourism and travel, that's what we experience on a regular basis. But there's a small percentage of Americans that actually travel internationally, or if we see people that are dressed differently than us, we shy away from them versus become more interested in a proactive and positive way as we deal with folks. So it's refreshing to hear that that's exactly what you're dealing with or focusing on through your ministry. 2011, speaking of shaking up things a little bit, we were all, wherever we were, I was in my office on 7th Street in a building that was built in the 1800s. And, I lived on the West Coast as a kid, and I remember the drills for earthquakes, which were a part of our repertoire growing up in California. The day of the earthquake here in Washington, D.C., we had an emergency preparedness drill in our office in terms of things in which we should be prepared for that did not include an earthquake. So the earth shook, and we were all in shock. And unfortunately, there was damage that was done to some of DC's most precious monuments and memorials, the Washington Monument, Union Station, and of course the Washington National Cathedral. Tell us about it from the perspective of, I don't think you were here in 2011 per se, but I know that a lot of things have happened and are still happening that perhaps you can share with those that are listening.
I mean, yes, as many folks know, there hadn't been an earthquake in this part of the country in 150 years of that size. So no one was ever expecting one, quite frankly. And the cathedral, the energy of that earthquake when it was released, every earthquake has a different shape, takes a different form. The energy from that earthquake was released at the top of the building. So most of the damage to the cathedral took place at the top of the building. The inside, the nave, although we had to shut the building down for some time, was actually fine. It was very safe, structurally sound. We lost pinnacles in various parts at the top as part of the building. $34 million worth of damage was done to the cathedral. And we continue to do those repairs. It's important to us that we spend a large portion of our money doing the ministry of this cathedral, trying to love and care for people. And so as we have been able to raise funds along to be able to do earthquake repair, we have done a section here and a section there and a section here. We've got about 19 million more to go. We've done 34 million since we've done 15 million since 2011. We've got about 19 more to go. And it's a slow process. Even if we had all the money, it's a slow process because everything in this cathedral is hand carved. It's created, lovingly done by hand, and when you got to lift it to the highest part of the building, it's a long process. But we're making progress. I know a lot of people who see the cathedral across the city, from a distance, they'll see the scaffolding up in the central tower and go, "Gosh, I really want to get that scaffolding down." Well, we do too, but what they're looking at up there is not scaffolding. They are really steel girders, making sure that no other parts fall off the central tower. Yeah. So we have some more work to do, but we're getting there slowly but surely.
Well, that's refreshing to hear, and it's important that nothing falls off for sure. I envision a gargoyle falling off in front of someone.
No, we don't want that.
So Randy, I'd love to walk around and you share with those that are listening and watching a little bit more about the Washington National Cathedral, if you don't mind.
We'd love to. That'd be great. So why don't we start with the Canterbury pulpit here, so to speak. This is one of the most beautiful structures in the cathedral. It was literally made at Canterbury Cathedral in England, and was a gift from Canterbury Cathedral to us. All of this cathedral is made out of Indiana limestone. And if you look at the Canterbury Cathedral, you can see it's a different color. It has a pinkish hue. It's because the British cathedrals are made out of French limestone. So this is French limestone. And everyone from the Dalai Lama to Martin Luther King has preached in this pulpit.
Wow.
This was the last place that Martin Luther King preached before he was assassinated. He preached here on Sunday and left for Memphis on Monday.
Wow.
And so it's a very, very special place. I am honored to be able to stand there and to preach.
And was it made for the Washington National Cathedral?
It was made for the cathedral by Canterbury, and it's a great gift. The iconography on the front really tells the story of the history of the Bible, and on the very front is the signing of the Magna Carta, you know, sort of the beginning of democracy, which was such an appropriate theme for this cathedral. This cathedral tells not only the history of the story of the faith, which all cathedrals do in stained glass and in stone, but this cathedral also tries to tell the key moments in the story of our nation, since it's the National Cathedral and a 20th century cathedral. So Lincoln and Washington statues sort of guard the very front of the cathedral, and as we move forward you see more and more American iconography. Everyone from Howard Thurman to Martin Luther King is carved in the cathedral, to the founding fathers throughout the building. Let's come down and look at a little bit of we'll talk about our art exhibit that we have put up.
Yes, very impressive. So many people have seen it somewhat, but may not know that you are able to display art.
Yes, this is the cathedrals are works of art, and so have it to be an art venue is really important. Holiness is exhibited not only in word and deed, but in beauty, and art exhibits are such a wonderful thing of beauty. This is done by Michael Pendry, who's a German artist, and he has done exhibitions in cathedrals around the world. And this is called The Doves. And it's made of 2,000 origami doves. Each of them, or most of them, have handwritten prayers on them. And Michael Pendry comes in and he hangs them differently in every space. And we were so thrilled that he would come here to the cathedral, and we had him install them while the cathedral is closed. And we'll be offering some virtual experiences of these beginning on Valentine's Day with a wonderful concert we're giving online, and we'll be rolling out the doves. And then we really look forward to, in the spring, we hope, as things begin to open up, that we'll be having specialty tours in here and various exhibition nights for this wonderful piece of art. And it'll be with us through May.
Impressive. So when it comes down, he comes back in and then it's installed somewhere else? Yes,
it's installed somewhere else, and he adds doves to it wherever he goes, and it's got a great rich history to it. And it's a beautiful thing. You know, we thought it was especially appropriate now. Doves are symbols of hope and symbols of peace and symbols of growth. And so to have this here now, we love it. I mean, we just love walking through here and looking at it. We know the public will love it as well.
It's beautiful, absolutely.
And then we have what people euphemistically call our space window, which is a beautiful window. It's meant to show the universe, really, in stained glass. But one of the special features of this cathedral is that we were given 7.9 or 7.2 grams of moon rock by the Apollo 11 crew.
Really?
And that moon rock is in the center of that window.
Interesting.
And it was presented by the crew and installed in that window. And we love being able to show that off for folks when they come in here.
So the reason for the gift is because they're just very...
National Cathedral, and it seemed like an appropriate place to, the wonder of the fact that we left our little blue ball and went to the moon and came back, that it seemed an appropriate place to be able to celebrate that.
I agree. It's beautiful. Absolutely stunning.
Yes, it's a special place.
So the first cornerstone of the cathedral was laid in
1907.
1907, and I think you have a special family reference to that day.
Yeah, my great-grandmother, I didn't even know this till I became dean, quite frankly. You know, my family's been in Washington or in Alexandria for a long, long time. But it was after I became dean that I found out that my great-grandmother was actually here for the laying of the cornerstone.
Wow.
And her daughters were deeply involved in the cathedral my whole life, my great-aunts. And so I knew them well, and they loved the cathedral and were flower arrangers and did things here. But yeah, it was started in 1907. The cornerstone exists in our Bethlehem Chapel, which is right below the high altar here, down below us. And the cathedral was built from east to west. And the last pinnacle was laid by George W. Bush, or George H.W. Bush was here when it was laid in 1990. That was the completion of the cathedral.
So a very slow development of but actually, comparatively speaking to some of the Duomos in Italy, it was built in no time.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that the only difference between building this cathedral and building the great medieval cathedrals is, one, we have steel in the roof and don't have acres of oak trees, as
right.
As happened at Notre Dame.
Yes.
And we had hydraulics. So to move the stone was so much easier than the pulley system that used to be used.
Wow.
So yes, we built it relatively quickly when you think about how other cathedrals have been built. But there's a wonderful story that exists in how this building unfolded and the history of our country that unfolded with it. You know, whether it was pausing during World War II or the struggles during the Great Depression or this cathedral's role during the Vietnam War, that sort of thing. The cathedral's, its building and its life follows along the history of our country.
And the thing I love the most about it too is when you're flying into Washington, D.C. or different parts of the city, you see the cathedral. Tell us about the land. And neither of us were around when the decision was made to build it here, but do you have any of the history in terms of why here and
Yeah, it's actually a really great story. So one of the visions that L'Enfant had when he laid out Washington, D.C. was at one point he was going to put down on the mall around the judicial and the legislative branches of government, he was going to put what he called a great church for national purposes, which would be down in the midst of that, sort of balancing out the sacred and the civic downtown. Well, that never happened. We have a separation of church and state in this country, very appropriate. So that was never built. But the late 19th century, 1890s, the then Bishop of Washington decided that it was important to have a great church for national purposes in this city and decided to build this cathedral. But rather than build it downtown in the heart of the city, he decided to build it, he found these 58 acres in the highest point of the city. It was all countryside then, pretty much, and took a huge risk, invested most of his own money, the equivalent of something like $4 million of his own funds, to help purchase this land and to begin the construction of this cathedral.
Wow. So before the cathedral, this was farmland, or were there actual?
There was some farmland. There were some houses scattered around. St. Albans Church, which is up here with us, that was here.
Okay.
So we were actually the interlopers on St. Albans, not the other way around. God bless them. So they were up here, and this area, this hill, is called Mount St. Alban. That's its official name.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful green space. We have some of the oldest woods in Washington, D.C. up here. On Mount St. Alban. As a matter of fact, there's a fox, 2 turkeys, a herd of deer who live up here with me, because I live up here on top of the hill.
Right.
And they come and go from what we call the Olmsted Woods.
Wow. So you open your door one day and there's a fox trotting through the front door, through the front of your lawn. Wow.
And Olmsted is who designed Central Park, was also involved in designing the space up here.
Right.
And including we have one of the most beautiful gardens in the city, which anybody who visits should come up here and see what we call the Bishop's Garden. It's absolutely stunning.
And anyone can come.
Absolutely, anytime.
It's awesome.
Anytime.
So now is this technically the tallest point in Washington, D.C., or is there? Has there ever been?
Yes, it is
Yeah,
technically the tallest point in Washington.
I've heard
DC.
that, and I thought that to be the case. So it's,
Of course, the cathedral itself is not as tall as the Washington Monument, but when
Right.
you put this cathedral on top of this hill, it's the
it's
tallest part in the city. Right.
Absolutely, and it's one that, even though a lot of Washingtons may have never physically come in, they all know it, and they all reference that. Yeah, it's the National Cathedral, Washington National Cathedral. Excellent. So here's another question that people normally ask when you're in a cathedral of this magnitude: is like, who is buried, or are there people, significant people, that were physically laid to rest here in the Washington National Cathedral?
Yes, so there are 230 people, I think, buried in this cathedral.
Wow.
We have a crypt downstairs for ashes and for full body burial as well. And Helen Keller is buried in the crypt of the cathedral, as well as we were honored to welcome Matthew Shepard, who's now interred here at the cathedral. And there is only one president who's buried in Washington, D.C., which I think is fascinating. People don't realize. You'd think there'd be a lot of them.
Right.
There are a lot of presidents buried in Virginia, but only one buried in the district, and he's Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson is buried here in the cathedral.
So that's impressive. So is there a process tied to that, or is it still something that is, if someone wanted the honor of being buried here, is it still doable today?
Just like weddings, if you want to be buried here at the cathedral, that can happen. We don't say no to necessarily folks. We try to be as accommodating as possible. It's not inexpensive, given how small the space is, limited the space is.
Right.
But we also have a beautiful memorial garden now outside the cathedral that lives within the arms of the cathedral, and that's much more accessible for folks who would like to be buried here.
Wow. So the beautiful stained glass and all of the other features of this space, is there something you'd like to share in terms of something that personally stands out, or you?
But if folks have never seen it, our great rose window on the west end of the cathedral, and I know we have lots of pictures of that, is perhaps the most beautiful window, I know I'm biased, but that I've ever seen. And in the evenings, as the sun is setting, especially around this time of year, if it's a clear sky, and we're offering a service in here, the light hits that window directly, the setting sun, and just lights this place on fire with its beauty. And it is my favorite. It is my favorite window in this cathedral. And there's a little balcony at the very top up there, and it's one of the places I love to take people when they come to visit.
I'll have to come back so you can take me to
Yeah,
that
absolutely. I
balcony.
would love to do that.
Outstanding. So, well, how long does the upkeep of the entire Washington National Cathedral, what's that like?
So it's approximately $30,000 a day to open the doors of the cathedral.
Wow.
It is a great treasure that we are stewards of, and so people have been very generous over the years to help us build a small endowment, but to help care for the upkeep of this building. There's always work that needs to be done, as you can imagine. We're upgrading Fire and Life right now in the building to make sure that that's really in good shape, and we're always doing work. We have a new heating system in the cathedral, which I don't think is on right now, but we do have it. So yeah, it's a big undertaking every year, and we have a wonderful staff of folks who are stonemasons. We have stonemasons here at the cathedral, which is really, unfortunately, a dying art.
Yeah.
But we have we have two stone carvers and a stonemason here at the cathedral, and they are still at work carving. Right now, they are carving a bust of Elie Wiesel, who is going to be placed here in the cathedral and a part of our human rights porch, and we're excited about that. So there's always work going on in the cathedral.
I would imagine that there has to be a unique process tied to who is, like the bust that's being created now. Like, is there a commission that's in place that strategically looks at what makes the most sense in terms of a person being displayed here in the cathedral, or?
Yes, I mean, I think technically they say that the dean is the chief iconographer of the cathedral, but I don't ever do anything in a vacuum, and we have a whole group of folks who come together to talk about what's the iconography that really needs to be added, that we're missing. And we're in the process right now of building, it's going to be very exciting. I can't get into it too much, but we have a really wonderful artist who is going to be doing 2 new stained glass windows for us.
Nice.
And looking at some thematics, some themes that we don't have enough of here in the cathedral. They're going to be windows around racial justice and racial reconciliation and the journey of especially African Americans in this country from the struggles of slavery into what we hope is a new and brighter future.
That's excellent. I look forward to seeing those when they're done. Well, thank you for this amazing tour of the Washington National Cathedral. There's nothing like having a tour with the Dean.
Well, it's my pleasure. Anytime, as you can tell, I'm not hesitant to talk about the place.
I appreciate it. It's definitely our pleasure. And our members are tuned in, as well as I'm sure so many others that are learning a lot more about you and the cathedral itself. So we really appreciate this opportunity to spend the morning with you and learn more about one of Washington's amazing treasures. So,
well, we're thrilled to have you here, and we're very grateful. Thank you.
Excellent. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Claire Carlin.
Thank you, gentlemen. I have, in our conclusion today, a few questions that were submitted by our viewers through the YouTube chat. And the first 2 are for you, Dean Hollerith. If you could share, is there anything in particularly significant about the tile pattern on the floor where you were just walking? And do you have a favorite element of this building?
There is nothing, should I say, theologically significant about the pattern of tile in the floor, other than beauty. It's quite beautiful. And the different tiles represent, the tiles are very different. So they represent sort of the breadth of our nation, that they're intended to do that. Different kinds of stone are in the floor. It's hard for me to pick one place that I love the most in this cathedral. I can tell you one of the things that the floor reminds me of it actually, one of the things that we're doing that if you haven't seen it, I would love for people to see, is we are building the largest Lego cathedral in the world. When it's finished, it'll be the size of a small minivan.
Wow.
And actually a large minivan, about 600,000 pieces. And it is a replica of this cathedral. And folks are able to buy Lego bricks. And when the building's open, they can put the bricks in the model itself. And it's a direct replica of the cathedral. So the floor that people love to look at is completely represented in Legos, which is fantastic. And all of the money we raise goes to the earthquake repair that we talked about. So people can see it online, but I love it. I love going in. When we were open, the building was open, I would go in every day to see the progress that was taking place, because every day that you'd have a couple more hundred bricks would go in, and it's really special.
That's very cool. I know that all of our young friends of Destination DC will be excited about those Legos too. You have covered a wide-ranging subjects this morning, and I appreciate it. So I'll just close with one that kind of ties this together in saying, given both Destination DC and the Washington National Cathedral's wide-ranging community outreach, how do you see that role evolving in this year, and what are you most looking forward to in 2021?
We continue to try to make the building of as much use while we're closed as possible. So we held a whole bunch of blood drives in the building since we've been closed, and we will continue those, as well as food drives here in the building. We're also hoping that if possible, we'd love to be a site for vaccines, for vaccinations, to use this building as a place for people to come for that purpose. We of course want to be supportive of however the district wants to handle it, but we would be willing to offer ourselves for that. And I'm very excited about about beginning to bring people back As things begin to open up again, our tours and our programming will continue to be live, virtual, but also to be offering some in person as well will be exciting. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I mean, I got a whole list of programs that we're going to be running coming up in the next year, but which will be on the website.
That's right. And Elliott, do you want to answer about how you're seeing the community and what you're looking forward to in 2021 as well?
I'm looking forward to the nuisance of millions of people in the way as we're driving around Washington, D.C. I say nuisance jokingly because that's what's missing right now is just a congestion because people want to come to Washington and experience all that we have to offer, not only as a destination, but let's just face it, as the nation's capital and the fact that we represent all 50 states, 7 territories, and of course the District of Columbia. So just looking forward to a peaceful year with more understanding of each other and the opportunity to get back to what I consider one of the most peaceful opportunities that are out there, which is the opportunity to travel and to learn a lot more about America and through coming to Washington, D.C. So, of course, the vaccine, I'd love to think that by the summer of this 2021, we will have at least 2/3 of the, don't quote me on this, but I'm hoping that that's the case. I'm in the right place to have hopes like that. 2/3 of the population vaccinated, and we will be talking about reopening the global community for travel again.
I think that Elliott and Randy speak for all of us on that this is the right space to be hopeful. So I thank all of you, our members, clients, partners, and colleagues for tuning in today. This presentation will be available on YouTube, and we'll share that link with you. There are a few people that worked with Elliott and Randy to put today together. In particular, I want to make sure I thank their teams, and that includes Val Ciccone, Kevin Ekstrom, and Laura Lynn Lee here at the Washington National Cathedral. Busily working the chat on YouTube included Mimi McNamara, Anisha Prasad, and then from Destination DC, a number of people supported Elliott this morning, but especially our member event producer, Emily Vecchione, and our Director of Communications, Danielle Davis. So we've all been given ways that we can enjoy the Washington National Cathedral historically, spiritually, and socially, and we look forward to doing so, and we wish you a really great and healthy winter. Thank you.
I feel like the organs should be